Diane Swonk is chief economist for the investment firm Mesirow Financial and advises the U.S. Fed. She joins us now from Chicago. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So what's your take on the jobs report?
Well, I think the headline number understates the strength in the U.S. labor market. We saw a lot of good trends within the number with those upward revisions you mentioned. Actually, the number came in better than many expected. And we've seen several upward revisions in a row, which means momentum in the labor market is actually on the upswing, which is good news. They're missing the actual job gains when they do the initial cut because hiring is actually outpacing what their initial estimates was. That's a good sign rather than on the other side of it when we were sometimes seeing downward revisions, severe downward revisions to the numbers earlier in the cycle. So I think that's the good news. The composition, some real positive signs, meat on the bones, business services coming back, legal services, full-time jobs, accountants, engineers, consultants, management. Those were many jobs that were cut pretty dramatically during the height of the recession and have been slow to come back. But over the last 6 months, we've seen some comeback there. A little bit less good news was the hiring we saw in food services, drinking establishments, retail. Some of that's due to employers trying to reduce the hours that their employees work and hire more workers to avoid paying for health care. There's a 30-hour per week threshold there, and they'd rather those workers opt into the Affordable Care Act themselves than provide health care. So there was some mixed news there, but we're also seeing shippers hire up and warehousing. That's related to online coming into the holiday season. Remember, last year was a disaster when we had unseasonably harsh winter weather and understaffing in shippers, and many people didn't get their holiday gifts in time for Christmas. They want to avoid that this year.
So help explain this. You know, I talked to some people who say, listen, it doesn't feel like a real recovery. I mean, we're what, years and years out of the recession. It doesn't feel like the numbers are showing. And these are pretty good numbers. Even GDP is really coming back. What's going on here?
Well, the reality is that even though we're coming back, we're whittling away at the weakness out there, and whittling away isn't fast enough given the depths of the recession. We're also, for the overwhelming majority of households, those wages being stagnant still, only 2% on a year-over-year basis, well below what the Fed would like to see, at least 3% wage gains. That is really important because the overwhelming majority of households are still in the hole on income and in wealth from the Great Recession. They're still trying to regain ground lost. So even though we're improving, we're still trying to crawl ourselves out of a hole. And so many people are still feeling they're nowhere near what the previous peak was, and that ongoing stress in labor markets is still present. We also saw a little bit of an uptick in the participation rate, but not enough. We see a lot of people staying in school, some of them staying marginally attached because they're afraid they can't get a good enough job to pay for their debt related to school, and they don't want to start the clock ticking on that debt. So although this is good news, it's not terrific news. And frankly, you know, anything less than, we were losing almost 1 million jobs a month at one point in time. By this stage, you would expect after those kind of losses to see 500,000, 600,000, 222,000 over the last 12 months. Good, not good enough to feel great about the U.S. economy.
And the types of jobs coming back, that's a part of this, too. I talk to people who say they don't work one job. They work 2 jobs just to make ends meet. I talked with one analyst who told me this morning that he thinks the variety of jobs continues to be a joke. He says wage growth is embarrassingly low. How does the economy break out of this rut? And I'm assuming it comes from confidence, something that just doesn't seem to be there.
Well, confidence by businesses to pull the trigger and hire. We've got job listings are way up, but they're just listing the jobs and not filling the jobs. And, you know, that is one thing that's a real problem. And it's not just a mismatch of workers. If they really want to get workers, I mean, back in the 90s, frankly, all you needed to have was a pulse to get a job. So clearly they're not desperate to fill those jobs, and they're not raising wages to fill those jobs aggressively. So I think that's important. The other issue here is that there is somewhat better composition of job gains. I think that is important. There is some meat in the bones, but it's only some. You still have, like I said, this dominance of, you know, part-time jobs. Like you said, many people even more so now having to work more part-time jobs than they had to because they have to split their hours. Because if they were working 40 hours a week at one restaurant, now they have to work 30 hours at one and 10 hours at another. I think these are very important issues because that sort of, you know, makes it much more difficult for people trying to, when you're working more than one job and they're both part-time and you're not getting health care, you're going to have to buy it yourself. Those are very difficult things to have to juggle in terms of schedules, families, and let's face it, you know, retailers say they're hiring up this holiday season, but razor-thin margins, they say, well, we're not going to increase wages. At the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding, and it's in wage gains.